Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I hope you guys are doing all right this morning. It is a bright and early, Tuesday morning. Whether you are driving on your way to work, whether you are working out, whether you are making love to your spouse, whoever that is, or your chick on the side, definitely enjoy the show. I hope you guys are having a good morning so far. Look, this is, I'm going to be doing this Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, as they call it. And if you want to check me here, I'm also putting up videos on Rumble. And of course, I pop in every so often when the mood hits me, when I feel like popping in addition to the Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. That was a mistake. I'm going to have to update that. But I hope the sound quality is okay. That is something else that I've also worked on in order to nail down and get it suitable so it wouldn't necessarily be fluctuating and everything else. I have a damn good show for today. Naboja Malish, he is going to come on and have a conversation about what is taking place in Georgia. There seems to be a color revolution going on where the opposition party and the president is not accepting the results of the election. And of course, the U.S. gets involved into anything, not minding its own business. Georgia was weird because I don't know if you remember this. Early on, there was a situation where Georgia was passing a FAIR law, foreign agents law. Now, we have a foreign agents law here. That is the thing that they're basically using to try to prosecute Scott Ritter, saying that he was working for the Russians against his own government. Okay, fair enough. But the intent of the law is that we want to know who is investing money, resources into our elections that are foreign. So if you have the Turkish or the Russians or the Iranians or the Chinese or the British or pick your pony, and they're dumping money into people and candidates in this country, or for that matter, causes in this country, well, we want to know. We don't necessarily want to have our politics influenced by external sources without us knowing what those external sources are. Now, it is massively politicized. That is true. By the same token, sovereign nations on some level should want to know who's investing money into their races, especially if they're trying to change or alter the contours of the politics in that country. All right. When Georgia does that, the U.S. and the EU freaks out. Now think about that for a moment. Why would another country freak out that you are ensuring that your elections, or for that matter, your politics, are secure and sovereign? Why would foreign actors freak out when you try to ensure the integrity of your elections? Is it because maybe they wanted to influence the politics in that country, to push that country in a particular direction? Yeah, I really think that's it. And so now, with them losing the election in very similar contours of Ukraine back in 2014 during the Maidan, they are all of these people showing up into Tbilisi, a loud minority that is effectively trying to do something similar that Ukraine was trying to do. Mark is going to be here, and I'm going to ask Mark about this because I think what they're trying to do is open a second front against Russia. There was already a conflict between Russia and Georgia. And if you remember, when they came out and said Ukraine will be part of NATO, I believe this was in 2008, Georgia was also attached to that. Georgia and Ukraine would be part of NATO. Russia said that is not going to happen and was willing to go to war in Georgia. So I don't necessarily know why they believed that the same thing was going to, or something different was going to happen to Ukraine. Either way, I'm almost inclined to believe they knew what was going to happen. They knew what was going to happen early on. William Burns, writing the memo, "Niet means niet," made it very clear that this was going to be intolerable from the Russian point of view and that they were going to have to get involved. They did it anyway, presenting a Hobbes choice. Either you allow yourself to be surrounded militarily by hostile actors working at the behest of the United States, or you take muscular action to prevent that reality. In either case, it creates, let's say, a headwind in regards to your operations. The reality of it is, though, Russia was able to exceed that headwind, end up being quite successful in their own right. Not to mention the sanctions end up revving their economy, forcing them to kind of build that stuff internally. So those businesses and everything else were able to grow internally as opposed to having these kind of external forces in the country. Either way, Georgia is racked with a certain amount of political chaos right now. We will see how it unfolds. Mark Sleboda is going to be joining me at 8 o'clock. That is always a good conversation. Malik Abdul will be on the show. The band is going to be back together, at least for 45 minutes today. So that should be good. At 10 a.m., Professor Morandi, ideally, will be on the show. And I'm saying ideally because last time we ran into some difficulties in getting everything to work out just right. The thing I want to talk about today, before we go into and before I grab the Voyager to bring him into the show, something interesting is happening with Iran and Israel. Yes, Israel has continued to murder people en masse. Again, it is the only country that seems to explicitly go after civilians. But again, they're going after civilians for a very specific reason. They want to create a greater Israel, which means they need to move people out of various areas. Now, it's only a country of 8 million people, so they can only go so far with that, right? And so you do it piecemeal at a time. Israel, under the basis to which they operate, and the reason why I said the basis to which they operate, I say it that way because if you say, let's have a two-state solution, well, they don't want to do that. That is clearly off the table. They have never really wanted to do that. So there's that. So then if you say, okay, well, let's have a one-state solution. One man, one vote. Everybody's there. Everybody's equal. Let's do it like it was 2,000 years ago. All of you are Semitic, meaning Arabs are also a Semitic people. So one man, one vote. They would turn around and say, well, wait a minute, but that's not a Jewish state. That's something else. That's not Israel. We need a Jewish state. We need ethno-religious supremacy. That's what we need. We need to be better and in charge and superior. All right. So where does that leave you? Well, that leaves you with one of three options. You either exterminate everyone, you either expel everybody, or you have to come up with a solution that allows people to live together. There is no way out of that box. That is literally the only thing on the table. You expel, you exterminate, or for that matter, you figure out how to live together. Where living together is not on the table. And what you end up with is expulsion and extermination. So the thought is we will starve the people in this area, or we would kill the people in this area to get them to move into a different area. And ideally, if we could, we would get one of the surrounding countries or multiple surrounding countries to accept the Palestinians. The reason they're destroying schools, mosques, UN buildings, shelters, blowing up hospitals, tents, is because the entire point is to make the place uninhabitable, with the idea that the Israelis could come in after the fact and rebuild. That's what they want to do. That's what they're trying to do in Lebanon. That's what they're doing in northern Gaza. It is clear as day. The U.S. is being fundamentally dishonest in the way that they're basically talking about it, because they keep acting like there's some kind of deal to be had. Bill Burns, CIA director, is in Doha right now talking to Mossad, meaning the CIA is talking to Mossad with no Hamas leader there in those negotiations. And then the interesting question is, well, why isn't there a negotiator, a leader for Hamas in those negotiations? They murdered Anaya, who was the other political appointee that was dealing with negotiations. He is a dead man. They murdered him in Tehran. And when Sinwar was made lead negotiator as an FU for the murder of Anaya, they murdered him also. So for the last year, these negotiations have been used as a cover to continue to kill and continue to expropriate land. And so I don't know what deal they're going to come up with, but he is floating a 28-day pause because a ceasefire is not and has not been on the table. We will see if anything comes out. I mean, all things being equal, this is something that they want to get done before the election so they can say, hey, see, we got it. We got it. We got the ceasefire. Now you can vote for Kamala Harris. That seems to be the plan in the way that they are playing this. Again, we'll see if it works. I'm going to take a quick break, and I'm going to bring in my first guest, Naboja. Stay tuned and enjoy the Jamarl Thomas Morning Show, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Back in a moment. are back, and I am hearing an echo. We are back. There we are. We are back. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Jamarl Thomas Morning Show. I hope you guys are doing all right today. And I am back with my guests. We're joined with Sleboda Malish. He is a Serbian-American journalist, blogger, and translator who wrote a regular column for antiwar.com from 2000 to 2015. He was also, at one point, a senior writer for RT. Neb, how you doing this morning, man? You doing all right?
Doing well. Good morning. Happy to be on the show.
Okay, wait a minute. There we are. Okay, yeah, man, I'm glad you could join me. There is a lot that is going on, and your appraisal of it will do us great service. So, one of the key things that have taken place is in Georgia. Let's start there because the events there are just bananas. The Georgian Dream Party wins the election. Now, Western reporters have been basically have said that there were irregularities and everything else associated with the election. So put that to the side for the moment. You get the president, Zorbas coming out effectively saying she doesn't want to accept the results. You get multiple parties, opposition parties, coming out saying they don't want to accept the results. And they start calling for mass protests. And on top of calling for mass protests, the Georgian president also points out that they're trying to steal the future of Europe from the various people in Georgia. And this is looking a lot like what was taking place in Ukraine in 2014 when it was the color revolution. Give me your take on this. What is going on the ground in this? And is this like 2014 color revolution?
In context, Georgia actually had one of the first color revolutions. The first ever was here in Serbia in 2000. But in 2003, they had a color revolution that brought Mikhail Saakashvili to power. And he was basically U.S. educated, U.S. agent, changed the country's flag, changed the constitution, got Zurabishvili, the current president. She was the French ambassador to Georgia at the time. She was a French national. He gave her citizenship and made her foreign minister. The woman's been around for 20 years as a Georgian. She didn't grow up there. Imagine, the French ambassador to the States becoming president.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Wait, and became president of the country? See, the thing is, in the States, that wouldn't necessarily be allowed. You would have to be a natural, like, for example, Arnold Schwarzenegger can't become president because he's.
Yes, but that was a requirement that was originally put in to thwart Alexander Hamilton from running for office. It seems to be around to the present day. But in Georgia, apparently that was not an issue. And so as long as you're ethnic Georgian, you're fine because they didn't make a difference. Well, here's the thing. She actually became president because she was endorsed by Georgian Dream. And then she fell away from them because her obsession was getting Georgia into the EU, which they were fine with that too, except until a few years earlier, basically around the start of the Russian military operation in Ukraine, when there was this pressure on Georgia to become the second front and declare war on Russia. And the leader of the party just recently gave an interview and basically said this one Western official, he didn't kiss and tell, he didn't say who it was, basically said, you need to declare war on Russia. And he said, well, why? We would be overrun in 3 days. And the Western official said, yeah, but we'll help you fight a guerrilla war afterward. And I'm not going to bother pronouncing his name because I'm going to butcher it. He said, why would you want us to die for you? And so at this point, it seems that Georgia Dream basically realized that they don't want to become Georgia Nightmare. And they decided, okay, we're going to pass a law requiring everybody who takes money from abroad, whether Russian or EU or American, as long as like 30% of their income is foreign, they need to register. It's not even a FARA. Like this was a very, very watered down version of the American FARA law, but it was inspired by it. And the opposition responded by shrieking that this is a Russian law, that they're agents of the Kremlin, and all of these, and then waving EU flags and Ukrainian flags and American flags, thereby proving Georgia Dream's point. This was last year. They finally passed the law this spring and immediately got sanctioned by the US and the EU. And basically, so they've been under tremendous pressure. Basically, the West has done everything to prove Georgia Dream's point. And now they call the election and they win 54% of the vote. And the OSCE, which is internationally recognized as a very pro-Western pan-European organization, says, we've seen some slight irregularities, but nothing really game-breaking, nothing even close to what the opposition is alleging. And the opposition isn't alleging anything specific, mind you. Zurabishvili actually said, well, no, not even Americans can prove that Russians meddled in their elections, but they meddled in their elections anyway, because, we know it's the Russians, they have this playbook. It's like the Adam Schiff quote of all Adam Schiff quotes. You don't know what actually happened, but you know Russians.
Well, wait a minute. Actually, have that clip. So I'm going to play you two clips. One is the Georgian president having this conversation about, well, we're pretty sure it's the Russians, even though we can't necessarily prove that it's the Russians. We just have a feeling about it. Let's see, clip number 5. This one.
It's always very hard to demonstrate. No country has been able to demonstrate, not even the United States when there were Russian interferences in their elections, nor other European countries. So we are not going to be in the position to demonstrate more than countries that are much stronger to demonstrate the hybrid attacks that they are under. But what is important is not to demonstrate outside, is what the Georgian population knows, feels, and has seen, because who else can see more what is happening in the country, in the villages, than the Georgian population.
That clip is a bit low, but effectively what she said was, well, we can't really prove that there's any kind of election interference from the Russians. We can just feel it. And our feelings is enough to validate the fact that there's Russian interference. And then she even goes so far as to say, not even the Americans can prove that there was Russian interference. Well, maybe there wasn't Russian interference. Maybe it's that.
Russians, clearly. I mean, that's, if that's what she feels like, I guess we have to respect that, except we don't. And the more important factor is that the Georgian people don't, because her position is largely ceremonial. She can veto laws, but I guess if Georgia Dream has veto-proof majority, which they seem to at this point. And here's the thing: the opposition. This is the thing that trips me up with the whole color revolution business, because usually when the Americans prepare a color revolution, one of the key ingredients is uniting the opposition, whether they want to be united or not. They basically force the opposition together, put one leader in charge of it, and then contest it jointly. The Georgian opposition actually has like 4 parties, distinct ones, that are not necessarily friendly with each other. And they won anything from like 11% to 7% of the vote. So altogether, something like 40 something, not nearly enough, obviously, to win the election. And so I'm not really sure why they're fussing, because, even if the 4 of them together managed to get like 51%, which they didn't, they wouldn't be able to form a coalition anyway. But here they are saying, exit polls. Well, first of all, exit polls are run by NGOs that you're funding. So, it's like, who are you going to believe exit polls or votes? And secondly, all of this stuff that they're saying right now, literally every single thing that the opposition and the president have said would have been actionable as a felony in the United States under the J6 precedent over the past 4 years. Basically, and I'm not seeing like New York Times or the Washington Post or Newsweek or CNN declaring Salome Zurabishvili as democracy denier or, election denier. No, she's a voice of democracy. How exactly is she the voice of democracy? Who does she represent? The population that didn't vote for her, that voted for the other party? I mean, I don't know if the elections are honest, but if we're going to be fair, we're going to have to take the Georgians' word for it. And she's saying, Finland and Estonia and all of these European countries didn't recognize the result of the election. Well, last time I checked, Georgia wasn't in the EU, which was part of the problem. And nobody asked them. It's none of their business. Like, what business is it of America's to recognize elections in Venezuela or Belarus? Is it your territory? No.
So one of the other interesting things, and I'm glad you pointed out the FARA law, because the FARA law is fascinating, just in the sense that, as you pointed out, we have one here. And it's like the moment that you get a lot of countries complaining about a fair law, it's like, well, we don't want you to know who's putting money into your elections. And it's like, why don't you want us to know foreign sources putting money into our elections? You have laws indicating, basically, to clarify who's putting money into your elections. Why can't we have it? Which kind of shows the hand on some level. It's like the only reason you would not want us to have this law is because you want to influence our elections in this kind of clandestine manner, which is something and gives us more of a reason for us not to want you to be able to do that. Matt Miller, creature in Washington, came out and said the following when the election results were basically called. This is Matt Miller, discussing a country that he doesn't live in and has no connection to at all.
We have consistently urged the Georgian government this year to walk back its anti-democratic actions and return to its Euro-Atlantic path. We do not rule out further consequences if the Georgian government's direction does not change. We want to see the process investigated. We've noted the irregularities and the calls from local and international officials to see a full investigation, and we join those calls.
Does that mean that you take issue with the results?
We are not, but don't have a final assessment. So we don't have a final assessment on the results now. We want to see
as they have been characterized.
We want to see an investigation
by various people,
we want
including non-Georgians.
We want to see an investigation take place.
So he wouldn't go so far as to say that the elections are dodgy. By the same token, he wants an investigation. He needs an investigation. That's what he wants to see, which is rather astonishing. The U.S. keeps putting its nose into people's business that it has nothing to do with.
Years ago, I used to say, just imagine if the situation was reversed. Imagine if there was an American election, a controversial one even, and you had like Canadians and Mexicans and the European Union and China and Australia and South Africa saying, well, we don't think we're going to recognize the results of these elections. There seems to have been irregularities where we need an international investigation. This is really dodgy, and there will be consequences for denial of democracy. Americans would go ballistic, and rightly so. But yet the State Department and Count Smirkula, its designated spokescritter, seem to be fine, declaring that the entire rest of the world is America's business, and that all of these, it's like in one breath he says, oh, they're a sovereign, independent democracy that has the right to choose its own path, which is the mantra that they keep repeating about Ukraine. And then they're like, oh, but if they don't do what we tell them and the process doesn't produce the outcomes we want, then there's a problem and there will be consequences. Can you guys hear yourselves? Like, what gives here? What would absolutely floored me. I was looking at the protest last night at Tbilisi. They basically blockaded the parliament for 3 hours and gave speeches, very angry speeches, and then they dispersed. People who expected some sort of riot or whatever. No, they just went home. But the key demand at the protest was that they organize a new election under foreign supervision. And I'm going, wait a second. You claim to be a sovereign, independent state, but you want a colonial power to step in and organize your elections. That alone should disqualify you from everything. Wow.
Super weird, to put it mildly. And you're right.
Paid for by, the Euro-Atlantic NGOs, and meaning governments that are using these NGOs as cutouts. These people are literally agreeing their platform in a meeting with the American ambassador and the EU ambassadors. They're foreign agents, pure and simple. They might think they're Georgian patriots, but if you're literally conspiring with foreign governments to subvert your own country's constitution and to have a foreign power administer your elections, I'm sorry, that's treason.
I can't say I disagree with you. It's dodgy, to put it mildly. I want to move to Lebanon for a bit. I've been fascinated with the politics that's been taking place there, especially around the notion of Israel basically slaughtering civilians, going from Gaza to Lebanon. I've made this point that the objective seems to be to create this kind of greater Israel. And so we're going to bomb mosques, schools, hospitals, basically any living situation, and then rebuild when Israel, ideally, in their mind, steals the territory, occupies that territory in order to expand further, either into Lebanon or, for that matter, and to take more of Gaza. One of the interesting things, or the goals, at the very least, some of the conjecture, is that Israel is trying to create a civil war in Lebanon. One of the Hochstein, Joe Biden's envoy, who's a dual citizen of Israel and the United States, used to be an IDF soldier. The notion that you're going to let him, quote unquote, represent America is outlandish. But whatever. He goes and delivers a document. I believe this was last week, I believe. Gives a document that has been called a surrender bill, effectively saying, we want you to move out of southern Lebanon. We will occupy southern Lebanon. We want the right to be able to patrol and take that area, and have flights and everything else in that particular area. The president last month came out saying, we will attend to the UN security resolution. And that resolution indicated that Lebanese forces will go to southern Lebanon and patrol southern Lebanon, which is effectively Hezbollah territory. So what is he saying? Is he saying that he's willing to have a civil war with Hezbollah? What is going on with the politics in this? And do you think they're going to, whatever he wants, because this took place before Israel started this kind of mass bombing campaign in Beirut, killing all of these people, whatever he wants, would he be willing to accept, A, the surrender bill, there's that, but B, is he really willing to put forces down in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, despite the fact that he wouldn't raise a hand to the Israel, who's basically an invading military? Would he really go to war with his own country?
Lebanese politics, Lord. I mean, I grew up in Bosnia, and I was there for the civil war that essentially got kicked off by the inability of three communities to agree who's going to run things in an independent state. And this is knowing what happened to Lebanon in the 70s, because that's exactly what happened there. They had a quota system that basically protected you had like three different groups: you had the Shia, the Sunni, and the Christians, and they had quotas for each group. And then when one of the groups said, "Oh no, we're no more numerous and deserve more rights," the whole thing fell apart, and they had a horrible civil war that devastated that country and turned it from the Pearl of the Levant to, let's just say that it belongs more at the garbage dump these days, especially after the explosion 40 years ago that obliterated half of Beirut and knocked out, their economies in tatters because of banking failure. Obviously, a lot of these, wars around the place, Syria and the constant Israeli attacks on Syria, and that was all before the invasion of southern Lebanon. But Lebanon's been in a rough place for a very long time. And they sort of seem to be on a recovery course after 2006, when Israel fought a war with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon over this Litani River line and lost badly. This was the conclusion of the Israeli government commission that investigated, basically said this was a fiasco, even though at the time they claimed victory and retreated. But the Israeli government commission said this was a total fiasco. We accomplished nothing at the tremendous cost in blood and treasure. And Hezbollah declared victory because technically they did win. And ever since then, there's been sort of an uneasy peace up north, and it didn't really kick off until October 7th and the Israeli attack on Gaza, at which point Hezbollah started lobbing rockets into Israel. And so what happened, over the past month or so is that Netanyahu basically said, well, we have no easy targets in Gaza left, so why don't I just open a flashy new front? And went into Lebanon expecting an easy victory. And from everything I've seen, the IDF actually got its teeth handed to it by Hezbollah. They opened fire on UN peacekeepers. They shelled civilians. While their air force has pretty much been bombing with impunity, on the ground has been a completely different story. And Israeli media are now saying, well, maybe we should wrap up the campaign in southern Lebanon within a week or two. We've accomplished our strategic objectives, which is usually, when you translate from bureaucraties, it means we kind of got beat and we need to boogie out. But I think
Just to piggyback on that one, Gallant came out, I think this was yesterday, and effectively said they had lost so many people that they need to have, renew the military to get more people in the military. Some of the documents came out saying they lost like 2,600 people just in southern Lebanon alone over the course of the last, few weeks at this point. So, yeah, you're right. They seem to be having a hard time. Clearly, they can bomb with impunity from the air. But the moment that the military got involved, they seem to have a hard way to go. So, agreed.
I mean, I'm not sure if our listeners and viewers understand the extent of this. 2,600 casualties for Israel is catastrophic. They're not a large country, both in territory and in population. 2,600 killed in Ukraine is a light afternoon, which goes to show the scope of that conflict, which is massive. But 2,600 casualties is enormous for Israel. I'm actually, frankly, shocked they've been able to sustain war effort for the past year, because all of their past wars were very, very short and quick. One of the reasons that the leadership of Israel back in '67 gave for preemptively attacking Egypt, the so-called Six-Day War, or June War, I believe the Arabs called it, was that Nasser wasn't going to give them a pretext, and they needed to fight because they couldn't stay mobilized past 3 months. And here's it's been a year, and obviously they're still going. So one big question is, what's the Israeli economy doing, and how is it managing? And then there's the whole question of, to which extent is the U.S. subsidizing them to continue? But this is one of those. If anybody thought that walking into southern Lebanon is going to be easy, that somebody is stupid and should have been fired. But there were government officials in this current Netanyahu coalition that literally did say, we want to annex the southern Lebanon up to the Litani River. Now, I'm going to take a step back and refer to people who have actually fought in the Israeli wars of 50s, 60s, and 70s, like Ariel Sharon, who basically said southern Lebanon is a lost cause. We shouldn't be there. Gaza is a lost cause. We should withdraw from there. And actually, Sharon, as prime minister, made a decision to withdraw from Gaza and bulldoze all the Israeli settlements in there. This wasn't so long ago. This was less than 20 years ago. And he did this because he concluded that they will not be able to win this kind of guerrilla war against the Palestinians. And Netanyahu thinks he knows better. Now, funny thing about Netanyahu is that his brother's a war hero. He's not. He's always been a politician. So here's this guy who's always had a chip on his shoulder as the junior son, basically thinking he knows better than generals who have actually won wars, and he just wants to prove them wrong, and yet all he's managed to do is prove them right and kill a whole lot of people.
I mean, well, he doesn't seem to think that, and he thinks Israel is acting as if it's winning, and it seems to. I mean, I guess it depends on how you look at it, right? In the context of, if the objective is we need to kill a lot of people in order to evacuate these people out of a particular area, the problem is they're still bogged down in Gaza. So it's not like they've eliminated Hamas, and this is after a year of fighting. So after, this military with nuclear weapons has not been able to put down a resistance group after a year. And then they expanded it into Lebanon, and then tried to expand it into Iran. The Iran thing is fascinating to me. It seems that Iran is looking for an off-ramp. Now, I had a guest on yesterday from Iran, and he pointed out, he said he has no trust in the leadership to attack. That ultimately, over and over again, they prioritize de-escalation. And thankfully, Iran has been somewhat pragmatic. I mean, for that matter, I would argue Russia has been somewhat pragmatic and has been trying to avoid these kind of larger conflicts or these larger escalation and managed escalation. From your point of view, what is Netanyahu's objective here? Because clearly Israel is vulnerable. Iran has shown it to be vulnerable by being able to basically hit it at will. Iran can hit any portion of Israel. Israel is only a country of 8 million people. Iran is a country of 90 million people. So there's no way they can win a war that goes longer. And you pointed out yourself, this war of attrition is not the type of fighting that Israel is accustomed to. They're accustomed to these kind of short spurts or these kind of air campaigns. From your point of view, knowing that Israel will get hit and that U.S., regardless of what else the U.S. could do, it can't prevent Israel from getting hit. What do you think Netanyahu's ultimate objective?
Well, I think he sort of miscalculated. I think he believed the Israeli military to be stronger and more powerful than it really is, and that his enemies will be shocked and awed into submission, and that hasn't happened. And so he doesn't have an off ramp. And let me backtrack you for a second. I'm convinced, and until I see evidence to the contrary, I will remain convinced that the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, which was the right thing to do on principle, but the way it was executed was horrible, sent the message to the rest of the world, friends and enemies alike, that the American empire isn't what it presented itself as being. And all of the clients, partners, allies, call them what you want, decided that, wait, now is the time to create reality on the ground, because so that we have something when the Americans leave. And the Americans might leave tomorrow, might leave us just like Ashraf Ghani holding a bag of gold on an airstrip before heading to Doha, as the Taliban jeeps approach. But the idea is Americans will be leaving. They're not going to be around forever, so we need to secure the bag. And you have ethnic Albanians in Kosovo pushing to ethnically cleanse Serbs. You have Netanyahu declaring war on Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and everybody else, and speaking in this apocalyptic rhetoric at the UN and elsewhere. There's several like these flashpoints around the world where American clients and allies have decided we need to rush. And then you have American enemies, adversaries, designated rogue states, whatever, who are basically saying, so wait, this means all we have to do is give it a little push or wait for them to implode. Either way, this explains partially. I think this explains both Netanyahu's impatience and Iran's apparent excess of patience. Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake is a quote that has been erroneously attributed to Napoleon. It's actually something that Lord Nelson said, the famous British admiral who defeated the French. And why would you? You let the enemy make a mistake, you meme him into making more of them, and then you just walk in. There's another meme in modern day of Xi Jinping sitting smugly, and the caption is "Do nothing, win." Because again, China isn't doing anything in terms of imperial expansion. It's just winning left and right through trade deals because the Americans are sanctioning everybody and imploding the international economy. If you can win by letting your enemy make all the mistakes, what's wrong about that? That's straight out of Sun Tzu's Art of War. Whatever I may think about the Iranian or Israeli leadership, their actions seem to be perfectly internally consistent with this analysis.
Okay, fair enough. But is that Afghanistan, or is that just this kind of reality that the world is looking for something different? Like, for example, when Joe Biden came into office, Joe Biden said, I'm not going to shake Mohammed bin Salman's hand. I'm not going to shake his hand. He murdered Khashoggi, so he's gonna be an outcast. Then he said, I'm gonna talk to his dad. I'm not even gonna talk to him. When the Ukraine war started, you got the situation where they stole all of the Russian reserves. I guess what I'm getting at, is it Afghanistan, or is it these kind of disparate strands that get across that A, you are not our equals, and B, something else, a new organization is drawing other people in. Meaning, if you have a situation where they steal $300 billion, what is your first thought? Oh my God, that could happen to us. Or if you have a situation where you see the U.S. getting involved in the politics of domestic nations, and you say to yourself, I'm sick of them doing this. We want an equal exchange. Meaning, is it the facts on the ground in the context of multiple events that have taken place? Specifically, I would argue with the acceleration of the war in Ukraine. I kept saying the war in Ukraine was about more than the war in Ukraine. It was about this kind of geopolitical influence. Do you think it's like, how do you really think it's just Afghanistan, or is it one domino after the next that just so happen to fall that have organized these nations of the world to say, finally, we need something different?
There's definitely been a pattern that's extended itself over time. You're right. Afghanistan was sort of the flashiest example. It was when you have this doctrine of global empire, in which America is the indispensable nation, or however Madeleine Albright put it, that the entire doctrine of the United States government, present United States government, I'm not sure what's going to happen, after November or after January, but the entire doctrine is this Latin proverb that goes, what is allowed to Jupiter is not allowed to oxen. In other words, we're gods, you're cattle, deal. But then you get exposed as not a god. In Afghanistan specifically, like that was a very particular humiliation. Then you have your narrative collapse is worse than your military or economic collapse, because narrative is the one that's keeping you propped up. But then you have also the economic collapse and the military collapse that's attendant to it. And now the entire world can see that the emperor has no clothes. Now, what happens in that situation? Ironically, all of these analysts in Washington who are claiming that the problem with America is Joe Biden's weakness, they're right, except not in the way they mean to be. Their claim is, we need to elect a stronger, emperor, president, whatever, and therefore, that will send the message that America is strong. No, Biden is a symptom of a systemic weakness. You have a government that's outsourced its manufacturing, that's destroyed its industry, that's waging war on its own people, that holds most of its population in contempt. And I'm not talking, one specific group. I'm talking most Americans, even specific groups they claim to champion. They hold them in contempt and disrespect them on a daily basis because they insult their intelligence routinely. And they think they can just lie their way out of any problem and any situation, and they can't. Not anymore. I mean, when you have Jeff Bezos, of all people, writing in the Washington Post explaining why he didn't endorse Kamala Harris, and he says, reality always wins. That is not a sentence I was expecting to hear from him. That is not something I expected to hear coming out of Jeff Bezos' mouth. Because he's been part of the establishment that believes in narrative over everything. And yet here he is saying, no, narrative doesn't matter. We need to recognize reality. And this whole blob in Washington, as they like to call themselves, is team narrative all the way. And the narrative has collapsed. When you confiscate Russian sovereign assets, I've heard these sanctions architects going, well, but nothing happened, so that means that nothing will happen. And I'm thinking, my God, you're idiots. You have no understanding of second-order consequences. When they confiscated Venezuelan gold, people noticed. And people say, wait a second, why should we keep our gold at the Bank of England? That's okay. And they started pulling it back. And then everybody's like, no, that's fine. Nothing's changing. Gold markets are fine. Shush, dollar. And now you have, with this thing with Russia, and they're taking it slow. You have the European Union that's, I'm going to use a naughty word here, that's cocked beyond belief. They will do anything the American government tells to their own detriment. And yet this is the line they're drawing, because most of these funds are stuck in Euroclear. And for all of these European chihuahuas that are barking loudly about helping Ukraine, they don't have anything to help them with because they've emptied their armories. Their militaries are for parade purposes only at this point. They've basically let them atrophy because Americans wouldn't let them build up, because one of the things that the American government has always hated, which seems counterintuitive because all of this, we need more spending on defense. The American government cannot tolerate any sort of competition to the American military. So they deliberately kept the European militaries in this sort of retarded stage where they can't do anything except, be decorations at American military parades. And now they're like, oh, well, the Europeans need to do something. Well, yeah, you broke their legs and now you're wondering why they can't run. Congratulations, you're an idiot. But, the Europeans are like, wait a second, if we nuke Euroclear over this, we're going to be sacrificing billions and trillions worth of wealth for 300 billion in Russian assets. Plus, the Russians have about 300 billion of our assets that we can scarcely afford to lose. And so the Americans and the British, who don't have quite as much of Russian capital anymore, are saying, oh, why don't you do this? Why don't you set your house on fire so we can keep ourselves warm? No. And I mean, again, if even the Europeans who are cocked beyond belief are refusing to do this, then it means it's a suicidal policy. So this is, Putin of all people was saying, you're destroying the dollar. But he didn't say, please don't do this. He basically said, if you want to do this, okay, we're prepared for this. We have a plan B. We have BRICS. We have this, a rival SWIFT system. That was horrible. They did so much damage to that. I'm sorry, but like if you control the world economy, if you control the world banking and transactions and economic flows and finance, and this is your lever, this is how you run the world, as the Americans have done, not through the military, but through finance. And then you destroy this lever. You wreck this mechanism and basically, you excommunicate people and expect them to wither on the vine and die, and they don't. And they prove to the rest of the world you can live outside of the U.S. and Western economic system. Well, you just played yourself.
This notion of narrative, I'm glad you brought that up because it's a big deal, right? We, working at fault lines, our job was to get it right. And from a world perspective, you're sitting on the moon, you're looking at events, describe what you see. And after, I think I did the job for maybe a few years, and then the Ukraine special military operation took place. And you talk about mind blown in regards to what's real versus what they say. It was an awakening. I mean, I felt like I was walking through this kind of illusionary garden where you turn on the radio or you turn on the media and they're reporting stuff that is patently false and that is clearly wrong. And it took like maybe a year or two for them to finally get around to speaking like we were speaking about it, basically saying, look, these guys are losing. Or the way they were talking about Israel, or the way they were talking about North Korea, or the way they talk about Iran. And they're like, oh, Russia is isolated. As Russia has 30 different nations and half of the globe working with them on this kind of new economic model. The things that they say are so offbeat and so wrapped with this kind of American triumphalism that reality takes a back seat to, as you put it out, the narrative. And by the way, social media is another really good example of that, where they're like, we need to control social media. We need to do something about Twitter. TikTok is a problem. We don't like the way that they talk about the Israeli conflict, basically showing it the way what it is. It is wild to me that they have gone to these lengths, as if I'm a dangerous man, that they have to really get off the air because we're giving a contrary narrative to their narrative. Basically, we are contradicting what they're saying with reality, and they don't like it and they can't take it. Neb, I'm going to give you the last.
Well, I think, when you've gotten to the point where the Polish government is declaring that they've erected an iron curtain on the border with Belarus, I think we've sort of, circled back onto the darkest days of the Cold War, and the people who supposedly won it have learned nothing from it and are basically LARPing as the losing side. And it's just one of those an epigram about the French Bourbons, the dynasty that was overthrown by the revolution and then succeeded Napoleon, comes to mind. They have learned nothing and they have forgotten nothing. And this is the kind of government that we're dealing with. And I'm just fearful of the kind of nemesis that has to inevitably follow this sheer quantity of hubris that we're seeing at work.
1000% agree, man. Nebojša Malish. He is a Serbian-American journalist, blogger, and translator who wrote a regular column for antiwar.com from 2000 to 2015. He was also at one point, because they've gotten rid of us now, a senior staff writer at RT, or at the very least he was in the past. Neb, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate you joining me. All right, guys, I'm going to take a quick break. I'm going to be back in a moment with the one and only Mark Sleboda. Stay tuned. Yeah, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me. Mark, how you doing, man? All right, we are back. There we are. What's going on with this? Oh, I see. We're back. I'm with the one and only Mark Sleboda, if I can get the view correct. He's an international relations and security analyst. Mark, man, always appreciate you joining me. Hold on, let me give one thing. I'm not necessarily used to using Skype. I usually use Zoom. So let me get the image thing straight. How do I view grid mode? Show me the call screen, full screen. All right. And together mode. No, that's not it. There we are. There we are. There we are. So now we can do this. Perfect. All right. We're joined with Mark Sleboda. He's an international relations and security analyst. And as I always point out, easily one of my favorite people to talk to. How you doing this morning, Mark? You doing?
Jamarl, I'm alive. Thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
Always an honor and a pleasure to have you. One second. It's always an honor and a pleasure to have you also. We have to start off with what's taking place in Georgia. It looks like another color revolution taking place. The president is not accepting the results of the election, and not just not accepting the results of the election, have called for massive protests. Multiple opposition parties have also shown up. A large number of people have shown up in Tbilisi. There's a 2014 feel associated with this. What's going on with this? Is the EU and the US trying to basically create a new front? Are there real and genuine irregularities with the election? What's the reality taking place on the ground in Georgia right now?
Okay, so there has recently been an election in Georgia over last weekend, and the ruling Georgia Dream Party won the election. And they won the election by a not insignificant margin for normal elections, some 54%, against a scattered group of four Western-leaning opposition parties. Now, coming to the forefront of the Georgian pro-Western opposition is the Georgian president, Salome Zorobchevili. And in Georgia, the presidency is a ceremonial post elected separate from the actual government, which is a parliamentary style government with the dominant Georgia Dream Party ruling it. And the Georgia Dream Party has refused to participate in the West's war of sanctions against Russia, pointing out correctly that it would destroy their economy, by which Russia is by far their largest trading partner. And they have recently enacted some legislation that the West is furious about. First was a Foreign Agent Registration Act, along the lines of which the United States itself has long had and has recently, of course, invoked again, and of which, while Georgia was passing their Foreign Agent Registration Act, France and Canada also passed Foreign Agent Registration Acts. And the Georgian version of this is very simple. It's simply that if you receive a substantial, we're talking greater than 20% of your income, whether as an organization or a journalistic outfit or whatever, from a foreign country, then you have to register and label your information as being provided by a foreign agent, by a foreign government, right? In the interest of transparency. And of course, this would apply to, say, I don't know, pernicious Russian and Chinese influence as well, right? I mean, if they were, funding groups, that supported their values, their goals in Georgia. But of course, that's never the problem, right? Because Russia and China generally don't do that, right? It's the West that does that. There are some 20,000 NGOs in Georgia, most of them funded out of the West. And Georgia is a small country with a relatively small population. It might make it the country on earth with the highest percentage per capita of foreign NGOs that have long meddled and interfered with their domestic politics, promoting, pro-Western and actual Western policies. So the rule of the game is that all non-Western countries have to make themselves completely vulnerable to Western interference and influence in their domestic politics. But the West is allowed to ban anyone at the bat of an eye, right? I mean, that, in any way that smacks of disagreement with the foreign policy orthodoxy of their own countries. It's do as we say, not as we do. So that infuriated them, and they actually took Georgia off of the EU accession track and numerous amounts of other aid over this legislation and demands. And Georgia also passed I agree, particularly with this one, that it is a Russian-style anti-LGBTQ propaganda bill saying that you can't promote this to minors, right? It doesn't make gay nightclubs illegal or anything of that sort. It simply says that you can't promote this through platforms and language through which young people whom sexuality is being formed exposed. And obviously this goes against the postmodern liberal values of most of the West, not all, but most of the West at this point. So that further infuriated them. The bill, however, is generally pretty popular in Georgia. So through a combination of this, the West has had enough, and they want the Georgia Dream ruling party gone. And yes, I think you are exactly correct. They're getting desperate. They're trying to figure out anything they can to change the situation in Ukraine from its, fatal course that they feel powerless to avert at this point, having their proxy forces having failed on the battlefield, even some of their direct forces obviously having failed on the battlefield. They're running out of weapons to supply the proxy regime with. And so they hope that opening a second and possibly a third front against Russia in Georgia and possibly Moldova, which also recently had a first round of elections and is due for a second one, where there is a Western-leaning, rabidly anti-Russian leader and very restive populations of the country that disagree with her course. That is also going to come to a head. Now, the particular case of this president of Georgia, the Salome Zurabishvili, she is until recently a French citizen, right? Who just took French citizenship or Georgian citizenship. She's Georgian ethnic, but her family, has long been in France, part of the Georgian diaspora. And what's more, she was literally the French ambassador to Georgia, right? I mean, talk about the capture of your government or part of your government, right? At least by a foreign agent. Anyway, so she refuses to. She senses that there's a crux moment coming in Georgia domestically. Where almost certainly she would fail to win re-election to her post, and the Georgia's Dream Party is increasingly ruling the country unopposed, but she has no grounds to not accept the election. The polls say this. The exit polls said this. The pre-election polls said this, right? And when asked, what evidence do you have? She says the Russians interfered in this election, right? And she was asked, how did they do this? What evidence do you have? Well, we don't have any evidence, and it's almost impossible to ascertain, evidence in this. Even the U.S. couldn't prove that Russia interfered in their 2016, 2020, every election, right, that the U.S. has, because everyone's always interfering in it. They never provide any proof. She says, so if the U.S. didn't provide any evidence for its claims, then I don't have to either. What's important is how we feel. And we believe that Russia interfered in the election, because there's no way the Georgian people would have really voted this way, right? That's their argument, which of course is simply asinine, right? I mean, it has no relation to reality. But in this world that we live in, this post-truth world that we live in, the European governments, already more than a dozen, have backed her on this and refused to recognize the results of the Georgian election, including Germany. That's the heavyweight. I haven't heard specifically that the U.S. has refused to acknowledge the election results yet, but they have put out a warning against the Georgian Dream government that it needs to change course or, quote unquote, face consequences.
Yeah, I have the clip for that one. And in fact, let me play that clip. This is Matt Miller, a deeply
We
unlikable
have
man,
consistently urged the
talking
Georgian government
exactly
this year
about
to
this.
walk back its We have consistently urged the Georgian government this year to walk back its anti-democratic actions and return to its Euro-Atlantic path. We do not rule out further consequences if the Georgian government's direction does not change. We want to see the process investigated. We've noted the irregularities and the calls from local and international officials to see a full investigation, and we join those calls.
Does that mean that you take issue with the results?
So he is
we're not,
effectively coming out and
don't have
is
a final
intruding
assessment, so we don't have a final
into the
assessment
results
now.
of
We want to
another
see-
or somebody
We want
else's
we want to see the
election.
investigation.
Again, is the goal, this is pretty cynical if the objective is to create a second front for Russia. What consequences is he talking about? Is the consequences he's referring to just this kind of mass protests, or is there something else that he's referring to?
Right. First is, they've called for mass protests. They made clear that their intention is to topple the government from the street, right? Color revolution style. And they have significant support in Georgia, right? 45% of the electorate is nothing to sneeze at, but it's not a majority. And of course, in a democracy, that should be the most important thing. But, in the West, in the geopolitical crux position they're in, they don't have to worry about they can't bother with such niceties at this point. So the immediate threat, of course, is openly backing the overthrow of the government. It has to be said that Ukraine has already sent hundreds of people who have experience, in the Maidan. Goncharenko, who was part of the Odessa massacre, the burning of the Odessa trade union with anti-Maidan activists inside of it that led to dozens of deaths. He is very loudly present in Ukraine, and their statements include, "We built a strong Ukraine. Let's help build a strong Georgia." Meanwhile, the same portion of the Georgian population is taking a look at what strong Ukraine is right now, and they're like, "Are you mad?" Well, of course you're mad. That's not a question, but not in our country. But of course, if the color revolution fails, then it will face other measures, including sanctions and more intense interference in their domestic politics, and possibly other measures as well. With the number of assassinations that have occurred against political figures who don't assassinations and assassination attempts against Western figures who don't follow the foreign policy orthodoxy dictated by the U.S., that people's life expectancy can be called into question as well individually.
Are they getting closer to Russia then? Because that's the insinuation, right?
They are. The official position of the Georgia Dream government is still the Georgian Dream government. There is, nothing is perfect, and the Georgian Dream Party is long been backed by a Georgian billionaire, an oligarch, Ishmael Ben-Vili, whom he served as Georgia's prime minister in the immediate aftermath of the ousting of Saakashvili, the pro-U.S. neoliberal strongman. He's long since stood down in favor of the much younger current prime minister of Georgia. But he's considered to be still an important political figure behind the scenes. The position of the Georgian Dream Party is: look, we have our problems with Russia, but the path of direct Western-provoked confrontation is not the means. We don't want a Maidan. We don't want to end up like Ukraine. And in fact, the current Georgian prime minister actually recently went to both South Ossetia and Abkhazia, the two separatist regions that Russia has since recognized as independent countries. He said, I apologize for what we did to you under the criminal actions of Saakashvili, which is huge, right? It's not going to make South Ossetia and Abkhazia say, oh, we want to rejoin Georgia tomorrow. But it is really, I think, an important and magnanimous first step, saying, look, we, as a society as a whole, we didn't support this. This was something that was done by Saakashvili, provoked by the West, and it was wrong. And we apologize for our role, the Georgian people, in doing that. Of course, this further infuriated the West and the pro-Western Georgian opposition. But the problem is that Georgia is so closely a divided country at this point. And it is, one that the U.S. has long had their finger in, right, since the Rose Revolution in Georgia back in the early 2000s. And they've never quite shaken themselves from this pernicious U.S. interference and influence in their politics. And so while the Georgian Dream isn't overtly pro-Russian, that's not what the standard is, right? The standard is, are you rabidly anti-Russian? And if you're not, then you're not anti-Russian enough. That is the standard that the West has set now. And the Georgian Dream Party is not rabidly anti-Russian. They're only mildly just to the negative side of neutral against Russia, I would say. And that's not near enough for the West. Particularly, the current Georgian prime minister has revealed that a U.S. official came to him and told him, look, we want you to start a conflict with the separatist regions, and to hold out against Russia for just a couple days and then retreat to the woods and until Western aid arrives. And he rightly said, are you mad? And then, of course you're mad. Why am I bothering to answer that question is probably what came to mind next. But he has very specifically detailed out that the West tried to get him to attack Russian or pro-Russian governments in South Ossetia and Abkhazia in order to open a second front against Russia, and he refused. So that quite certainly puts a target on his head, figuratively and perhaps literally.
And I guess that also explains the pressure that is being applied to the government right now. With them basically using this kind of political pressure and protest for a loud minority. Speaking of Russia, Ukraine seemed to have caught a huge amount of hell over the weekend, losing large numbers of people and losing territory. What is going on the ground? I haven't had you on for a while to discuss the latest in a special military operation. Give us an update so far.
Okay, so right now, I mean, the hottest area, of course, is the south central Donbas region, north of Ugledar, which Russia took just over a month ago, and in the direction of Pokrovsk. And in this area, the Kiev regime forces are not only in an operational crisis, but every indication is that they are in collapse. at this moment. They literally cannot slow Russian forces down. Russian advances at this point seem mostly limited by their own logistic demands. And they're just taking settlement after settlement. Over the weekend, they took a potentially up to 8 settlements, depending on which mapping project you're referring to. And all of this is also openly, for the most part, admitted by the pro-Kiev regime, the pro-Ukrainian mapping projects. So just a complete disaster. And there are multiple reports. These units, which are recently conscripted forces that have no intention to fight and die for this regime, are just running. They're breaking. They're not even fighting. And the Kiev regime just doesn't have anything, right? They're relying on just these recently conscripted forces and drones at this point. Like that's the entirety of the resistance forces that they're able to put up. And so right now, of the 3 big supply and logistics centers that were at one point before the fall of Avdiivka behind the Kiev regime's defensive lines, and now they're completely all being sieged. It's Pokrovsk, Kharkov, and Sleboda. And as of right now, Sleboda is 95% under Russian control. Right, the Kiev regime holds maybe a few buildings on the outskirts that may have already changed by the time we get, there's a little bit of a news delay. Kharkov is in operational encirclement and is facing an actual encirclement, a very large cauldron forming at this point. Numerous other cauldrons along this path have also been formed surrounding individual Kiev regime settlements with small numbers of forces, 100, 200 here, there. And right now, Russian forces are essentially in the suburbs of Pokrovsk and forming, beginning the boa constrictor movements for an encirclement of Pokrovsk as well. Right now, it is nearly in an operational encirclement, with Russian forces having a very large degree of artillery and drone control of the roads in and out of Pokrovsk. And Pokrovsk is going to be the final settlement in south central Donbas. And I expect Russian forces to be in the agglomerated town of Mirnograd within a couple of weeks. And then the siege of Pokrovsk will take place over the winter months. Once Russian forces are already ensconced within the agglomerated area of Mirnograd, they will then be able to use that as a launching pad, no matter what the weather is, and so forth. And once Pokrovsk falls, not only does that kill the supply lines to the rest of the Kiev regime forces in the Donbas, but it opens up operational space, because there is absolutely nothing between Pokrovsk west all the way to the Dnieper, all the way to Dnipropetrovsk and Pavlograd on the Dnieper River itself. Very small settlements, open steppe, no geographical barriers, no defensive positions, and no major urban areas. It's operational space. And that has led to frantic, desperate cries in the Kiev regime to begin the construction of defenses in Dnipropetrovsk now, but it's probably, to be honest, probably already too late for that. And it is suspected in Ukraine that the force now that is involved in the besieging of this area and eventually of Pokrovsk will then not move further north into Donbas, because there's already enough other forces there to finish up Donbas, but will strike out west into the Dnieper region, into the region of Dnipropetrovsk, and essentially open a whole new incursion into a new Ukrainian region there, probably in the first quarter of next year.
What is, and maybe the better question is, Slavoyansk-Kramatorsk, where is that in context of the military operations that's taking place now?
Okay, so that is to the north, right? It's of course always much easier if you pull up a map, but Pokrovsk, this whole Ugledar, Sleboda, Karahova, Pokrovsk is in south central Donbas. And then there's two remaining battles that are being finished up in central Donbas, which are the Battle of Toretsk and the Battle of Chasiv Yar, both of which Russia is in large control of those towns. And it's really just a little more than a cleaning up operation, a bitterly fought cleaning up operation there, it must be said. But the writing is definitely on the wall. And then further to the north and slightly to the west of that is what is considered the last Kiev regime's defensive lines of Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinovka. There is one remaining Kiev regime holdout of the very northern position in the Donbas, which is Seversk. But Russian forces are, again, already moving on Seversk as well. And they've been encircling that town as well. And supplies and reinforcements are already extremely difficult there. So Russian forces are on a trajectory, I would say, to militarily, essentially fully liberate the Donbas by the middle of the summer of next year.
I'm curious on something else. The FSB has effectively said that they were able to catch some saboteurs trying to, invade and sabotage in the Bryansk area. One of the people these were mercenaries. One of the guys was part of the U.S. Special Forces. There was that. What is being said about this? I mean, is there any word on the ground in regards to a little bit more context about this sabotage that was foiled?
Okay, I mean, it was an incursion attempt, right? It was another incursion attempt, largely composed of mercenaries, foreign forces. It really seems to have been a desperate play. Bryansk, so on the top, the northern border of Ukraine, you have the three border regions of Russia, of Belgorod, where numerous incursion attempts have been made and failed, and then the Kursk region, where the Kiev regime's current incursion is being eroded away by the day. And then the last border region there is Bryansk. And so this was an attempt to open a new, pretty much distraction, diversionary front in Bryansk, but they never passed the border. They were never able to even really, they were killed on the approach to the border. And this included not just this American mercenary, but numerous other European mercs, Venezuelan mercs, I'm sure not associated with the government of Venezuela, but the right-wing force, the pro-U.S. right-wing forces in the country, and the like, and possibly some other South American, Colombian mercenaries and the like that were in this incursion attempt there. It was really in the hundreds. It was relatively small scale, and they were handily defeated with not even a penetration of the border that had to be thrown back.
Also, there's still talk about North Koreans. And some of the analysis that I heard with this is that the objective is to try to get the South Koreans into the war by insinuating that the North Koreans are in the conflict. This seems to be outrageous to me, but is there any reality to it at all? I know the last time we talked, you mentioned that they may be training, but they're not necessarily in combat because, for obvious reasons, Ukraine is the one that is missing manpower.
claim that yet. I'm sure they will at some point, the North Koreans. Look, at North Korean soldiers are almost certainly in Russia, which is the largest country in the world. And they are almost certainly involved now in joint training with Russian forces, now that they are treaty allies, by the recent strategic partnership with a mutual defense clause that was signed and then ratified by the Russian Duma. And I would not be surprised at all that North Koreans are like, hey, can we hang out and gain some experience behind the lines of your military, seeing how you do logistics, how you arrange this and how you arrange that. That is almost certainly what is happening and is being blown up by the Kiev regime to make several arguments. One, to bring Western forces into the conflict, right? Possibly South Koreans, more realistically NATO forces, saying, presenting the threat of North Korean slave soldiers or some other ridiculous nonsense like this, straight out of Red Dawn, or the second and worst Red Dawn, it must be said, the remake. As far as I can tell, it bears no relation to reality. Some have mentioned the possibility that North Korean troops could legally be used in the region of the Kursk incursion to participate in the liberation of the knot of Kiev regime forces in Syria. I find that to be very unlikely. Now, to be frank, some statements by the Russian government have been a little bit coy in their denials, right? Which has only further fueled this kind of what I still consider at this point to be part of a disinformation op. Russia does not need the manpower, right? They don't need the manpower. Russian and North Korean forces have had no real amount of interoperability training. They don't speak a common language. Most of this internet evidence is completely fake. It's pictures of Russians who have an Asian background, like the Chukchi or some of the other the Buryats, the other Russian peoples of the Far East, who, to an untrained racist Western or Kiev regime eye, could passably pass as North Koreans. And this has actually been a feature of the Kiev regime's propaganda from the very beginning, the Banderite propaganda since before this conflict started, that Russia is the Mongol Asiatic hordes, and we are protecting Europe from the Russian Mongoloids, right? That's literally not a joke. That is literally the arguments that them and numerous NAFO trolls, it must be said, make. So this actually really dovetails into this. And they're also using this to push the argument for long-range strikes in Russia, because they're claiming that, the North Korean troops are right there behind the front lines, right? As if they're just hanging out there. If only we could use longer range, if only NATO could fire essentially longer range missiles, then you could get those North Korean troops. That seems to be another argument they're pushing, and some have suggested that it could also simply be part of we know we're about to lose Kursk, so in order to save some face, the narrative will be presented, we had Putin on the ropes. If only Kim Jong-un hadn't intervened and saved Putin's butt in Kursk. That is another facile propaganda argument that almost is certain to be put forward at some point. It would cause Russia so many diplomatic problems to involve North Korea at this point, and so many interoperability problems. It almost certainly would not, be worth any minimal amount of manpower that, again, Russia does not need. Troops with no combat experience. I find it all to be very, unbelievable. It doesn't mean impossible, right? I mean, but the Russian government has always been smarter than this diplomatically and militarily. So I still find it to be, as far as I'm concerned, a propaganda point as the Kiev regime attempts to, perhaps lure South Korea into providing more artillery and weapons, to NATO to provide direct troops. There's even been the suggestion that South Korean pilots could fly F-16s. Not that they would do any better against Russian, or much better against Russian air defense and Russia's own air force flying antiquated Dutch and Danish F-16s. But there's a whole lot of crazy disinformation going on about this right now, and it's just desperation.
I would tell you, I am deeply skeptical about this particular story. I've seen nothing to validate this at all. But they're still pushing it here in the West. One of the interesting things that I saw, I think it was yesterday, where Ukraine apparently put somebody in prison for a video showing these kind of press squads going and just throwing people in, grabbing people in and putting them on the front lines. What is going on internally? I even read reports saying that Arestovich made amends with Zelensky, and there's some kind of political front in Ukraine against Zelensky. What's going on the ground in a political sense in Ukraine currently?
Yeah, there's desperation definitely going on within the regime, right? And the mobilization, the mass forced conscription is failing. They literally can't get enough bodies, right, to anywhere come close to their losses at this point. And what bodies they are getting don't want to fight, right? So they usually run and break at the very first opportunity. And so increasingly, and as society sours even further on the whole mass forced conscription by brutal press gang things, they have now criminalized the filming of any of the press gangs at work, right? Claiming that it's all Russian disinformation, right? Why then they're arresting these people, and charging them with filming it, doesn't exactly line up with that whole of their own propaganda narrative. But it's increasing sign of desperation and increasing crumbling of the military front. Yeah, there's some rumors that Zelensky and Arestovich are kind of flirting online, but I don't think there's much more to that than this at this point. Those two figures are both too egotistical and politically I don't think that they're a good match for any type of anti-Zelensky alliance, but they're finding some rhetorical common cause in the fringes outside of Ukraine, because Arestovich is in New York and Zelensky is technically now part of the Kiev regimes. He's been exiled to the Kiev's diplomatic team in London. So I wouldn't put too much belief in any type of real political opposition emerging out of them. And considering that Zelensky himself is a flaming Banderite fascist who had multiple busts of Stepan Bandera and Shukovich in his office when he was the head of the Kiev regime's military, I'm not so sure that would be any better. If somehow Zelensky emerged as leading some type of coup against Zelensky. In fact, it would probably be worse. And the rest of the political forces, I mean, doubtless they are plotting and scheming and griping, but there's no yet sign of anyone moving in any type of real or even political way against Zelensky. And this is because of continued U.S. support. As long as the U.S. continues to support Zelensky, and the regime entirely depends on U.S. support, no one will move against him unless they get the signal, the green light from Washington. And that's where they are.
With the Band of Rights, if Zelensky one day woke up and said, I'm sick of this. My people are getting killed. I have a responsibility that I am not necessarily holding up to because, I'm getting my military killed in this way. Is he facing getting killed himself if he made a decision to try to seek peace? If he woke up one day and just decided, okay, I'm going to, work out a deal with the Russians. I'm sick of this. This isn't going my way. They're going to take it all. So I'm going to come to a deal. With the right wing, with the banderites in that country, allow him to make any kind of agreement over in any particular fashion, or would his life be at stake if he even tried?
Yeah. So first of all, I have to say that I think there's zero possibility of that happening. Zelensky didn't start out as a Banderite. I mean, he was a comedian who used to make fun of them. But somewhere along the line, it was early in his presidency, it was made clear to him what the regime that he inherited really depends on, right? What even Radio Free Europe at one point calling Azov a neo-Nazi state within a state. And since then, since the conflict, he has slowly mentally broken, right, and internalized all of this. He is, his own people, anonymous officials to Time magazine called him delusional, right? That he describing him as an emperor with no clothes. So I don't think that that's in the cards. But if he did, right, theoretically, if he did, yes, right. Obviously, the largest portion of the Kiev regime's, ideologicals that started this conflict are dead, right? I mean, that's not to say that there still aren't thousands of them, but the greater portion of those with the most combat experience and so forth have already died, right? Those are the ones who volunteered, right, when Russia began their intervention in the Ukrainian civil conflict. But of course, they're continually generating new ones, right? They teach in the Kiev regime schools, right? They indoctrinate the youth. They've got Banderite fascist youth camps and everything. So they're continually getting new younger cadres. So it's not something that's just going to wither on its own. And yes, Zelensky, his life would, be at risk. And numerous Kiev regime commanders who are of this Banderite fascist bent, including the 3rd Assault Division and the 12th, they have openly made threats. If Zelensky did do this, right, there would be consequences, right? We would come pay him a visit. Statements like that are just, the West doesn't, of course, even want to acknowledge these things because that would be acknowledging what the Kiev regime has been from the beginning. But they've been made openly on Ukrainian social media. So there's no question that the threats have been made. I just think that they're not necessary at this point.
Yeah, there's no inkling of peace in the sense. I guess if there's no inkling, yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, I haven't necessarily seen anything that gave any indication that he's willing to go in a particular direction. So, no, I agree with you. I want to pivot a bit. A larger question, and this goes beyond just the individual issues with Russia, Ukraine. It goes to BRICS for a bit. China often goes with this idea of win-win competition or win-win situation in relationships. And oftentimes when I'm bringing a guest on and having a conversation about China, one of the most interesting things to me is how does a country that believes in win-win deal with a country that believes in zero-sum? And how does that, function in the larger world? I'm going to get your take because I don't think I've ever asked you that. How does a country like the U.S. and Europe that is defending Western civilization in the way that they think about it. How does that, which is zero sum in real terms, deal with a country like China that ultimately believes in win-win? Or for that matter, let's flip it the other way because that's more interesting. How does China, a country that believes in win-win relationships, deal with a country like the U.S. that does not believe in win-win? We have vassals and we are a zero-sum country. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, the Chinese government is not a child, right? Okay, they're not a naive child who doesn't understand the world and what the U.S. is. The U.S. itself used to be the country that in favor of globalization, right, back in the 90s, and even early 2000s, used to preach win-win, right? Did they believe in it when they said win-win? No, right? What they meant was sign on to the rules of the game that are to our advantage. And once the rules of globalization, we've actually destroyed our own economy by exporting all our manufacturing and everything out of our own country, was the belated realization of what globalization has done to the U.S., which is transfer wealth and military power, lagging just a little bit behind that to Asia, right? So then the win-win was gone. And that was weirdly officiated during the Trump years. But notice that the Biden did absolutely nothing to reverse any of it, and it became the accepted decoupling position of the U.S. In China. So China is continuing this rhetoric, right? And it's basically, they may believe win-win for countries and political forces that are willing to work with them. But other than that, I think there needs to be a realistic recognition that, win-win for our friends and you lose for our adversaries, right? I mean, almost certainly that's what it is. We have to divide between political rhetoric and, everything else. And I think the Chinese government is almost certainly mature and even cynical enough to understand that the U.S. Regards them as a threat to their hegemony, that they are trapped in Thucydides' trap thinking, referring to the ancient Greek political philosopher who said that if you have a fading hegemon and a potential rising hegemon, that conflict is inevitable. The U.S. believes this wholeheartedly, and since the Obama years has been pivoting hard to Asia, preparing for this conflict, right? Trump's advisors, J.D. Vance, everyone, the greater threat is China. And they are, slowly trying to position the U.S. to contain and confront China militarily off of its own coast before, and provoke China, most importantly, in Taiwan and the South China Sea, before Chinese naval and air strength is such that the U.S. wouldn't even have a chance of beating China off of China's own coast, which, as far as I can tell, that point has already been reached. But, Washington is always a little slow to actually recognize reality and the limits of their own military power in this direction. So I think China is well aware at this point that the United States is completely untrustworthy, that conflict is almost inevitable. And they have vocally expressed that, right? Particularly about the Biden administration, even. They have spoken openly and said, look, you say one thing to us in private, and then you do the exact opposite once you're out of the room with us. How can we trust and deal with you in any way? We can't.
No, that's true. I mean, we lie as just as model of operations, kind of the way the U.S. operates. And yeah, you're also right. We have gotten very desperate, paranoid, this belief that it's getting out of our hands. You're also right that initially we set up these rules and rules of the road, especially after World War II, with this idea that, well, we're going to instantiate it. These are the rules we're going to follow up until the point where the rules become inconvenient because China is doing it better or some other country is doing it better. I want to pivot to Israel for a bit. So over the weekend, Israel attacks Iran. Air defense and videos of the air defense are astonishing. You're seeing stuff just gets knocked out the air. They don't make it and breach Iranian airspace. They seem to go through Jordan and Iraq flying low. There are videos of it taking place. There are competing stories, though, in regards to what happened. Apparently, Russia gave an indication, this is according to Sky News, about a few hours before the attack took place. Iran is downplaying this attack, whereas Israel is like, we hit everything that we set out for. We hit this base and we hit that base. I guess the question is, who is telling the truth in this, if that's even possible to discern? And is Iran downplaying it because they're looking for an off-ramp in this kind of escalatory management?
Okay, so first of all, forget Russia, right? There was an article out in Axios, which has been kind of become a go-to intentional leak source for Washington, right? They had an article that Israel itself sent warning to Iran before the attacks through intermediaries. All right, that has, if that's true, right, then this was another pantomime attack, like we saw Iran make with their first strike, and to a lesser extent, potentially with the second one as well.
Basically a face-saving maneuver in order to not get drawn into a larger conflict.
A demonstration of military force, but intended to not escalate the situation, right, and save, yes, political face. So I would suggest that that's largely what Israel did again against Iran. There's enough indications of that. From what word we have from Iran is that casualties were very light. I saw 4 confirmed dead. Almost certainly there was a few more than that. There is the suggestion in the Western media that this was some type of massive anti-air defense, or what's also called SEAD operation. That's nonsense, right? There was no Israeli aircraft that came close to penetrating Iranian airspace, right? This was all done. They fired missiles from well outside Iranian airspace. And that's not the way you do suppression of enemy air defense, right? It's just not physically possible. There may have been a handful of more advanced, more positioned air defense that were targeted, but there's no way this was some type of massive air defense campaign. This was almost certainly a limited strike, very limited. Again, almost certainly against some military facilities, but Israel almost certainly blew this all out of proportion. Claims that some 200 aircraft were involved is absurd. It was almost certainly probably a fraction of that. I would be surprised if it was around 50 or 60. There is no indication that this has had any type of huge effect. It was not the decapitation strike that was expected. It was not no attack against energy or nuclear facilities. This appeared to be Israel pulling its punch, or perhaps recognizing that, well, it's in relative terms, its punch has atrophied over the years against Iran, and without much more substantial U.S. assistance than they got, which, as far as we can tell, consisted simply of refueling aircraft, which were absolutely necessary, and satellite data. I don't see that any of the claims going around the Western mainstream media about the Israeli attack. It's not to say that it wasn't significant, but it was not any type of knockout blow or anything like that. And in fact, it may have well been orchestrated again as a face-saving maneuver, if this Axios report is accurate. What is more interesting and concerning to me is the statements out of the Ayatollah Khamenei, and then echoed by IRGC figures and others since, that at one level, it was a very vague and obtuse.
Vague is an understatement. I mean, Chinese are well known for doing that in diplomacy, and Russian official diplomatic can be very difficult to read, as well, even if you speak Russian, right? I mean, so we're dealing, of course, with translations, but there have been the suggestion by some that what the Ayatollah was saying in this was not an indication that they are going to immediately militarily retaliate for this Israeli retaliation,
but that what he may have actually been suggesting is that Iran could restart its nuclear program.
I heard that argument, but I didn't understand where that was coming from within the context of what he said, because like you said, what he said was very vague.
It was, but when he spoke of impressing upon the Israeli government of Iran's power and of their innovation, I have to admit it did not occur to me myself, but I didn't. It wasn't until then that I actually read the Ayatollah's statements myself. When I read it, realizing that that is a possibility, I think that statement does actually make more sense to me, which is not an indication that Iran is going to restart their nuclear program. It is that they are considering it, which is, there is a world of difference between those. And I believe that this was a roundabout way for Iran to send a signal to the U.S. To rein Israel in, or there could be a whole new round of completely out of control Middle East coalition. And if Iran developed a nuclear weapon, then Saudi and Turkey and Egypt and every other Arab country under the sun would want a nuclear weapon. It would be an uncontrolled arms race. And I don't think, the rest of the Middle East does not want Israel having nuclear weapons, but that doesn't mean that they want an arms race throughout the rest of the countries of the region and nuclear weapons itself. I believe that this was a warning. Like, we could restart this, that officials could make this decision, because the Ayatollah repeatedly in his statements referred to officials and was passing the buck on some type of decision to be made on how to impress the determination of the Iranian people on the Israelis. And I have to admit, it didn't occur to me myself, but it does make a lot of sense when considered through that prism and you take a look at those words. So put that in distinct possibility.
Mark, man, always appreciate you joining me. Mark Sleboda. He's an international relations and security analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sleboda, and on his YouTube channel, Real-Politic with Mark Sleboda, and on Facebook.com/Gramsci. Mark, always appreciate you, man. Thank you for joining me. All right, guys, I'm going to take a quick break. You guys are listening to the Jamal Thomas. There we are. You guys are listening to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Always appreciate Mark Sleboda. And to be specific about the comments from the Ayatollah. So he said, let me pull them up, because I had him sitting right here when I brought up the conversation with Mark. He's right. The conversation was extremely vague. Like, vague is an understatement. The spokesman for the Iranian Foreign Ministry, that's not that one right here, in remarks on Sunday, leader of the Islamic Revolutionary Ayatollah Khamenei emphasized the necessity of disrupting flawed calculations of the Zionist regime regarding Iran. Quote, they're making a miscalculation with respect to Iran. Our officials should be the ones to assess and precisely apprehend what needs to be done and do whatever is in the best interest of this country and nation. They, meaning the enemy, must be made to realize who the Iranian people are and what the Iranian people, youth, are like. Again, that is super vague. Now, if you look at it and say, assess and precisely apprehend what needs to be done and do whatever is in the best interest of the country, meaning we're giving this over to our political officials. We're allowing the political branch to figure out what needs to be done and respond appropriately to this attack. And he went further. He made the point of saying we shouldn't overinflate, or for that matter, underestimate the enemy. Again, this is very vague in regards to what it means in the context to which it's given. He's also right. some people have interpreted this to mean that they are now allowing nuclear weapons. There was a ruling, a fatwa, I believe they call it, against nukes. So for all this time about the U.S. trying to pressure Iran about having nukes and everything else, this was not on the agenda for them to do. This wasn't necessarily something that they wanted to do. However, if you're looking at what Israel is doing, where they are slaughtering and massacring all of these people and posing a consistent threat to Iran, considering they themselves have nukes, then it is possible that from Iran's point of view, in order to remain a certain level of balance, that they may also need to start investigating and going with nukes. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying that they have nukes for the last 20 years, that they were trying to get nukes for the last 20 years. That was patently false. Netanyahu is a degenerate liar, and he has been for the entirety of his career, not to mention just a blatant racist. So there's that. But if Iran wanted to get nukes, they have the technical proficiency to do so. Is that what it is? I honest to God don't know. Like I said, the statement that the Ayatollah gave, or Ayatollah Khamenei gave, was very, very vague. If it is true, though, we are in a new world if that's what they decide to do, and all hell is going to break loose. Israel has nukes. The United States doesn't care about Israel having nukes. And one of my concerns was that Israel does something and goes overboard in their attack. Iran responds overwhelmingly and hits every part of Israel, casualties and everything else. I don't think they would have done that. I think they would have isolated themselves to military bases and military matters, because for all intents and purposes, again, Israel is the one that seems to get a hard on by murdering civilians. Iran, who they call a terrorist state, has been more patient and more pragmatic in trying to prevent a war. From my point of view, I looked at this as an off-ramp. Like the commentary that was coming out of various camps, Ayatollah is going to get the last word, but many of the other people were basically echoing him. We reserve the right to respond. It's not the same thing as saying we are going to respond. One is more muscular. The other one is more circumspect. And if you remember, when Sean was on yesterday, he made the point of saying he has no trust at all that the government is going to respond, especially since up to this point, their mandate has been economic affairs. So when I read Ayatollah's statement, when he said, right here, they're making a miscalculation with respect to Iran, our officials should be the ones to assess and precisely apprehend. Yeah, they use the term apprehend what needs to be done and do whatever is in the best interest of the country and the nation. When I read that as a potential off-ramp. Meaning, I know we said we were going to attack. I know we said if they hit us, we were going to respond overwhelmingly. By the same token, I'm devolving this decision to the political space, and they can do what they feel they need to do. That was the way I read it. But in larger context, other people were looking at it as maybe Iran is finally have decided that they need a bigger stick. And the moment that you get nukes, for the most part, countries use that as a protective covering. Look at North Korea, where they basically, we have nukes. If you come at us, you are going to get the worst end of it. Look at Israel. We will do the Samson option. We will bring the walls down on everybody if the existence of the state is threatened. And of course, Russia has always said, we reserve the right if our nation is at risk. Everything is on the table. The U.S. says the same thing. China says the same thing. So all of these countries effectively function in very similar ways the moment that they have nukes in order to preserve the integrity of their country. Iran, who's under threat from the United States and Israel, both nuclear powers, what is it going to do? That's the question. What is it going to do? I'm going to take a quick break. I have the one and only Malik Abdul, the band getting back together, will be on in a moment. What time is it? It is 9:06. He's going to be on at 9:15. I'm going to take a quick break and set it up. If you enjoy the content, give it a like, share it, definitely subscribe. I am definitely trying to grow this channel. I'm doing my best to grow this channel. I'm trying to get better at the mechanics of this and be consistent with interviews, commentary, etc. brought to you Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard in DC. If you really enjoy the content, please consider giving through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. Super Chats will be read at the end of the show. Yeah, a little bit before the end of the show. And I think that's it. Oh, by the way, Morandi. So Professor Morandi is supposed to join at 10 o'clock today. I know that's after 7 to 10, but that was the only time that he had available. And he was gracious enough to try to do another interview after the last one failed. So I will be here for that also. And I hope you join me for that one. What I might do is end the show and then resume it or restart it, just so I have a clean... Yeah, I'll think about it. All right, let's take a quick break, though. You guys are listening to the Jamarl Thomas Morning Show. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jamal Thomas Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am glad that you could join me. My guest is going to be joining me pretty soon. Look, if you guys enjoy the content, like it, share it. There we are. If you guys enjoy the content, give it a like, share it, all that good stuff. If you really like it, you can support the content through PayPal, Patreon, or Super Chats. All chats will be read at the end of the show. Nothing racist, vulgar, anti-Semitic, etc., etc., etc. It doesn't necessarily have to be PG. By the same token, don't be an asshole. That being said, I want to thank all of my guests for coming on, and I want to thank all of you for your continued support. When Fault Lines was shut down, I started to try to reorient myself with the idea that I'm going to be consistent and I'm going to grow my channel. I've been stuck at 30,000 for God knows how long, and it's time to kind of break through that, whatever that is, that wall. And so far, things have been going up, but this show hasn't necessarily gotten the views, I guess, starting off. I grew this channel from 0, and I guess my feeling is if I'm consistent, if the content is good, if I can bring in new guests, if I can bring in interesting points of view, wide range of points of view, sometimes arguments, sometimes agreements, definitely discussion, a man sitting on the moon looking at events. That's the channel that I'm trying to give you and provide. So definitely, if you can, definitely support. All support helps, like I said, even a like, even a subscribe, even a share. All of those things are deeply and immensely appreciated. I'm waiting for my guests, for Malik to join. There's several stories that have been going around, especially on the domestic front, that are, I guess, what I would call pretty astonishing. A lot of this stuff is revolving around Trump. So at Madison Square Garden, Donald Trump had this kind of huge rally. The rally, by all accounts, was huge. The rally was not a success, though. And the reason why I said it's not a success, despite the fact that it was large, was because a lot of it ended up losing the thread to what Trump wanted to make as a closing argument. Meaning Donald Trump's closing argument was supposed to basically be, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Meaning, were you better off with me than you are currently? When you get 60 to 80% of the country saying it's going in the wrong direction, that's somewhat of a strong argument, especially if you can tie Kamala Harris to Joe Biden. You don't even have to do the tying. Kamala Harris herself tied herself to Joe Biden, effectively saying, when somebody asks, is there anything you would do different? She, not having an answer, didn't necessarily help her cause, especially since she was arguing, I'm a new way forward. Okay, you're a new way forward, but you can't articulate what you would have done differently or what you will do differently than the current way that people are going now, the current way that people don't particularly like. So you can imagine that new way forward argument hasn't necessarily given her bang for the buck. Nothing has happened in the race. And yet, when you look at real clear politics, you can see Donald Trump ticking up. And even in the polling average, taking the polling average, I would argue that that's less important from a national standpoint than it is in the states. And again, when you look into the state polling, especially in the battleground states, the one that are going to decide the election, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, etc., Donald Trump is either even or leading in those battleground states. This culminated with the Muslim vote. People, the mayor of Michigan, Dearborn, Michigan, multiple groups, imams and whatnot, representing the Islamic community and Arab community, coming out vociferously pushing for Donald Trump. I think some of the things they were saying were ludicrous. Donald Trump is a man of peace. He is not. And that shows how far we have gone with this idea that Donald Trump can be considered a man of peace. I would argue that Trump's appeal on that front, it's not that he's a peacenik. Donald Trump is a wild card. It's unclear what the hell Donald Trump is going to do in that office. He is, however, or at the very least has shown a propensity of being willing to make deals in a way that the orthodoxy would never do. For example, Kim Jong-un in North Korea is firing missiles into the Sea of Japan. Western media reports it as he's just crazy, he's just a lunatic, he just is doing it for no reason, just to antagonize South Korea. What they don't tell you is that there are military exercises that the United States runs with South Korea where we pretend that we're going to do a decapitation strike on that same North Korea. He has been very adamant that this is outrageous, especially since North Korea and South Korea are still in a state of war. There may be a demilitarized zone and whatnot, but ultimately they have never made amends and has never made peace. Under the Trump administration, at one point, it started to seem that it was a potential for that to resolve. Joe Biden gets in, the exercises begin again, in which case Kim Jong-un once again starts firing missiles. The media attacks Donald Trump, saying, how dare you make a deal with Kim Jong-un? How dare you go over there and talk to him? You're lowering the status of the presidency by making peace. It's just outrageous. There's this weird hegemonic, triumphalist, elitist point of view that infuses our media, especially when we're talking about foreign leaders, and especially around this notion of peace. It's almost as if, because we are a hegemon, it lowers us to deal with others on even keel. It lowers us to have to deal with countries, especially in the context of peace, what we believe in are vassals. And if a country is not willing to be a vassal, then by definition of us being a hegemon, the country is an enemy and is treated as such. North Korea is no longer this isolated entity anymore. Neither is Iran, neither is Russia. None of these countries are isolated in the way that the United States attempted to do so. And as we spoke about earlier this morning with Neb, the moment that you started using the dollar as a weapon, other countries will get together to try to find a way to mitigate that weapon that you are using against them. In this case, it just so happened to be cash. And with the U.S. being the reserve currency, well, they started to try to find a way to get around the fact that the dollar, or the SWIFT system, was being used as a club to hit countries that the U.S. considered to be enemies. The rules-based order, the rules for us, or the very least the rules for you, but we are above the rules. We can do whatever we want, which you can imagine creates a bit of consternation in the other countries that are effectively dealing with us, where we are looking at ourselves as indispensable. And if we are indispensable, what does it make everyone else? I know Europe thinks that we are friends, we're buddies, we're allies, and all of this good stuff. The reality of it is, from the U.S. point of view, we are okay with the Ukrainian conflict because from our point of view, if a war erupts, it erupts on the European continent. It doesn't erupt on North America. It is isolated to Europe. Now, Russia has made the point very clear that is not true. You are not safe on the shores of the United States, and we can hit you there every bit as much as we can hit the European capitals that will be involved in this conflict. We need to be very careful and be very clear about what is taking place and what your government is doing. And what your government is doing is antagonizing country after country around the world using proxies as a means of combat and a means of war, because an actual direct war is so catastrophic. Think about it for the moment. If you think about the conflicts that are taking place around the world, who is instigating those conflicts? And ask yourself, are we on the right side of history if we are indeed instigating those conflicts? Israel is just a European colony, no more no less. And as a settler colonial state, like every settler colonial state, they want to expand. We are backing them in that expansion. Joe Biden once said, if Israel didn't exist, we'd have to create it, because we want the capability of having pieces on the board in the Middle East, in the heart of the Arab states, or for that matter, Persian states. That is our objective. That is our want. So we give billions of dollars to ensure that Israel is safe directly, militarily, diplomatically, in regards to diplomatic support in the UN, and for that matter, paying those states that are around, like Egypt, in order to maintain influence to keep them off from being antagonistic. Same thing with Taiwan. we would say we agree with the one China policy, but then we salami slice the one China policy. So it's, no, we really agree. We're just doing this. And we're just doing this. And we're just doing this. Until you get to the point where there is no more salami to slice. It's gone. We're working with separatists in that country while simultaneously claiming that we believe it is one country. To call it deeply problematic is an understatement. We are trying to do to Taiwan the same thing that we are doing to Ukraine right now, to get them to go against China, to try to create a headwind for China's economic and industrial development and bog it down into some kind of conflict where they can basically try to use diplomatic pressure to undercut China. Same thing with Russia. You expand NATO to the borders of Russia, you knock over the government of Ukraine, and after you knock over the government of Ukraine, you put in a patsy state. And then you put in a state that you are effectively controlling. And at the point where you're controlling it, and you're doing this kind of proxy against Russia to create a battering ram against Russia, and you look around the world, and that tactic is being used all over. You heard Mark talk about Georgia, where they're trying to use Georgia as a second front. And because Georgia didn't go in that direction, now all of a sudden we're threatening Georgia. We're putting huge amount of pressure on Georgia, trying to collapse that government. I'm saying this is not good. This is deranged behavior. And it's behavior, though, in order for us to maintain a certain level of control around the globe by having our hands in all of these different conflicts and by creating chaos. BRICS has a different model. The BRICS model is working on this notion of collaboration and cooperation. And as they pointed out, these are states that agree. A, we're equals. B, we're not going to sanction each other unilaterally, so that is off the table. And C, we're going to try to work in our own currencies. This is a system that they're basically building, but understand, this system is being built as a direct result of the way the dollar had been used as a weapon and the way that Western countries treated these other countries. And for the most part, being sick of this kind of rule set that was created by these colonial states to advantage themselves at the expense of all of these other countries and continents around the world. There's a reason that they're trying to get into BRICS, and that reason is a hope of something different. There are a few things that are taking place domestically, and so I want to play a few clips. Mehdi Hassan is a self-righteous asshole. By the same token, like a clock that's right twice a day, on the Israel-Gaza issue, he is right. He was on CNN, and by the way, a damn good advocate for it. He was on CNN, and while he's there, a guest says something that is pretty damn racist. And the guest, by the way, ends up getting kicked off CNN. But I want you to hear the clip. Listen to what this guest says.
We have consistently urged the Georgian government.
3, I believe.
You don't want to be called Nazis. Stop doing
You're
it.
called an anti-Semite more than anyone else's table.
Yeah.
And people will sit there and... No, by me. I never called you an anti-Semite. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying...
I'm a supporter of the Palestinians. I'm used to it.
Yeah, I hope your beeper doesn't go off. The thing is that...
Did you just say I should die?
You should not.
No.
Did you just say I should be killed?
No, I did not say that. No, I did not say that.
Hold on.
Did your guest just say I should be killed on live TV?
I said I hope
Guys,
you're...
let me just stop.
You said you hope my beeper doesn't go off.
Because you said I'm a big supporter
of the Palestinians.
Hamas?
Guys, let me stop.
Palestinians.
Are you?
Am I what? No, of course I'm not.
Palestinians are not.
I apologize.
Are you a racist, violent person inciting violence against me?
Ryan, that is complete.
I hope you heard what he said. He said, I hope your beeper doesn't go off. Meaning they're having a conversation about the Palestinian issue. And as they're going back and forth, he basically effectively said, he called him a terrorist. Because keep in mind, the way they talk about it, they would say Hezbollah terrorists, missing the fact that many of the people that got injured or hurt were not part of Hezbollah, that those pages were indiscriminately out in the context of the country. But in their mind, they are going after terrorists. And so all of the people who had a beeper were terrorists. or terrorist sympathizers. And so when Mehdi makes this argument advocating for Palestinians, he evokes this notion of calling them a terrorist by saying, I hope your beeper doesn't go off. They consider it funny that all of these people got injured. A little girl, I believe, died and was killed by this kind of indiscriminate terrorist attack. It is understood to be a terrorist attack because it's going over in the context of the nation. It's not necessarily targeted in the least. And so you're having a conversation, and instead of you dealing with the point that is being made in the context of that argument, you decide to slander him by calling him a terrorist and making this kind of joke about pager going off, saying, hey, I hope your pager doesn't go off. Listen to it again. It's not just me. This is effectively, that's literally what he said.
You don't want to be called Nazis. Stop doing
You're
you
called
stop-
an
You don't want to be called Nazis. Stop doing
You're
you
called
stop-
an
you
anti-Semite.
undermine-
You've been called an
undermine-
anti-Semite
stop
more than
saying
anyone else
things.
at this table.
Yeah.
And people will
By
sit there
you.
and no, by me. I never called you an anti-Semite. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying I don't.
I'm a supporter of the Palestinians. I'm used to it. It's
Yeah,
fine.
well, I hope your beeper doesn't go off. The thing is that
you just say I should die?
You should not.
No, I
Did
said,
you just say I
no,
should be
No,
killed
I
on
did not
live
say
on
that. I
CNN?
said, no, I did not say that.
Hold on, hold on.
Did your guest just
Let me-
say I
No,
should
I
be
didn't.
killed
Let me-
on
hold on.
live
Just say.
TV?
I said I hope
Guys,
you're.
let me just stop.
You said you
Let
hope
me-
my beeper
beeper
doesn't go off.
Because you
Stop
sound like a
that
supporter
right
of-
now.
Of the Palestinians.
Of Hamas?
Guys,
I
let me
said
stop.
Palestinians.
Are you a supporter
Am I
of
what?
Hamas?
No, of course I'm not.
Palestinians
supporting
are
Hamas.
not-
Then I apologize.
Are you a
Ryan.
Then I
racist,
apologize.
violent person
Then I
inciting
apologize.
violence against
Ryan,
me?
Ryan.
That's disgusting.
That is completely.
No, I apologize.
Good
That
job,
is
CNN. Let's
completely
have first
out
block
of
say the
pocket.
Muslim guys
To be-
get blown
Then I
up.
apologize.
To be clear, he said nothing about Hamas. And in fact, what's stupid about that also, to piggyback on stupidity, it was Hezbollah where the pagers went off. Hezbollah, being Lebanese, he pointed out, I'm an advocate for the Palestinian cause, to which he immediately associates with terrorism. Because again, if you're supporting the Palestinians, you are apparently, in the eyes of all of these people, terrorists. It's outrageous. It's racist on its face. And they kicked Gerdusky, I believe his name, off. And CNN pointed out saying, we are not going to allow racist content on our airwaves, and he will not be allowed back. Abby Phillips, I believe her name is, the African-American host of that show, apologized after the fact to Mehdi, basically saying, look, we're sorry. This is not what CNN believes in. This is not our intention to have somebody on that would say or do something like that. Fair enough. Fair enough. I have been in arguments with people, especially on air, 105.5 FM on Fault Lines, that were advocates for the Israelis. And they are some of the most rabid, depraved, racist people that you would ever come across in the things that they say. Meaning they are okay. I mean, I can't even show some of the images that are out there. I mean, there was one with a little girl in a hole, and you could see the little kid put her hands out in a building of rubble. Who knows if they were able to get her out? People being burned alive in hospitals and so forth. I mean, this stuff is depraved. 40,000 to 100,000 people have been slaughtered. And you have one UN organization after the next, Doctors Without Borders, all of these people basically decrying what has been taking place, included the murder of journalists, meaning they are hunting down and murdering journalists because, after all, if you're committing a genocide, the last thing you want that genocide is to be documented, which is what it's being by those journalists. It's outrageous. That guy should have been kicked off for that. You can make an argument to support whatever you're making without slandering the person who you're talking to. And Hassan said nothing wrong in that exchange. It was the other asshole that decided to bring in the fact that he was supporting Palestinians and probably that he looked the way that he did or that he was a Muslim in order to use that and make the allegory towards Palestinian terrorists, which is exactly what Israel does. They would say, yeah, we don't really have any civilians that have been killed. Because from their point of view, all of them are not even human beings. It's just utterly disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. I want to play another one. AOC. AOC, what time is it? Okay, I'm going to assume that Malik is not going to join me because he was supposed to be here. So I'm going to close Zoom and we can just run it as is. AOC apparently was, she does these, I don't know what you want to call it. It's almost like these clips at home. They tend to be down to earth. I got to be honest with you. From my point of view, AOC has lost a lot of her sheen, if she had any sheen at all. Whatever she was, it's not necessarily who she is now. And from my point of view, it has been to her detriment. By the same token, she has ingratiated herself into the Democratic Party, and I would argue at this point is a full-fledged Democrat. For better or for worse, depending upon how you see that. I don't necessarily see that as the better. But she's doing a video, and she comes out. What number is this? Number 6. She comes out and says,
"Stop doing."
You're called an anti-Semite more than
this. Wait a minute. Oh,
I do not want to do 4 more years of resistance nonsense under Donald Trump. Okay. Like, good God. Like, do we remember what it was like waking up every day and there was some shit going on?
You remember what it was like waking up every day and there was some shit going on? Yes and no, I suppose. I mean, I don't even know how that's helpful. I mean, obviously, she's trying to make the argument that Kamala Harris will be a stable actor in all of this. She would be a stable factor, and Donald Trump was completely chaotic. What I would agree is that Donald Trump says things that are so off the reservation, you have no idea what he's going to say on any particular day. By the same token, I would also argue, though, that it's not like our world's stable. I mean, for God's sake, if you look around our world right now, you have a war taking place in the Middle East where Netanyahu has expanded even to Iran after murdering and slaughtering tens of thousands, up to 100,000 people, 2/3 of which are women and children. So there's that. That conflict can escalate into unpredictable ways. So there's that. That was allowed to escalate by Joe Biden, who continued to give them weapons despite the fact that a genocide was being perpetrated. Okay. In Russia, when it came up of, are we going to allow missiles to be fired directly into Russia? Understand the very fact that that question existed and the response of Putin saying, look, if you do that, there will be a world war, meaning we will go to war with NATO. All right. That war would definitely likely bring in China, Iran, Syria, to whatever degree Syria can get in. And it may even drag in other actors into that conflict against the forces of NATO, which have shown themselves to be lacking in Ukraine. It is believed that this will end up being a nuclear conflict because who's ever losing immediately are going to go to nukes, or for the matter, tactical nukes. Okay, well, you can imagine this is somewhat problematic if you want to have a world that perpetrates, that persists. Now, this didn't need to happen. And I call this a stupid war because the reality of it is, if you're expanding to the border of a country where you're trying to militarily surround it, no country would accept that. Meaning no country that has the capability of defending itself would accept that premise. Then to make it even worse, you knock over Ukraine, put enemy forces, meaning military, on the border and go on a killing spree of ethnic Russian Ukrainians, because ultimately Ukraine is a civil war that Russia and the West have joined in fighting. That didn't need to happen. And again, that could easily spin out of control if NATO decides, well, we're going to invade Ukraine because we don't want Russia to take it all. Russia was willing to make a deal over and over and over again. You had the Minsk agreements 1 and 2. You had the Istanbul agreements where Zelensky, Russia, had come to some kind of agreement, or at the very least an outline of an agreement that they were going to go with. The U.S. told them to cut it out, sending in Boris Johnson. Cut it out. You're not going to get our security guarantees. So the war continues. Fast forward 2 years later, 500, 600,000 dead Ukrainians. Meaning, this never needed to happen. The world didn't need to be this chaotic. North Korea being brought in from the cold at this point, where they have refined their missile capability with the idea of being able to at the very least hit mainland United States. Again, none of this needed to happen. This is utter chaos. And this chaos is taking place under the Biden administration for the explicit policies that Joe Biden went with in a foreign policy sense. You could say he sleptwalked into it, and the other presidents. Joe Biden is a continuation of previous presidents. That is true. By the same token, it's still happening on his watch. So, yes, I get it. Donald Trump is chaotic. Donald Trump is incoherent. He's a goofball. He may be even dangerous, especially in the context of this inability for him to accept losing, this level of ego and hubris and all that. Accept it. But don't tell me that the Biden administration is somehow a stable actor, a stable leader in a world of chaos. That is not the world to which we find ourselves. I want to do one last clip. And this is Obama. This is Obama. So Obama has joined in the fray. Michelle Obama and Barack Obama, both of which have joined into the fray. They are deeply concerned about third parties, especially in an election where the polling averages are so close. Meaning 10,000, 20,000 votes may decide this election depending upon the state to which those votes are cast. When you're looking at real clear politics and you look at the presidential election, it's super close. When you drill into the states, though, that's where the damage and the danger for Kamala Harris really exists. And the reason why I say that, now I haven't looked at the polling today, so we're just going to pull it up. All right. Michigan, Emerson, Trump, 49, Harris, 48, Trump +1. Pennsylvania, I don't know what that is, so I'm going to skip that one. Wisconsin, Trump versus Harris. USA Today Suffolk poll, Trump 48, 47. I mean, this is a big deal, right? Minnesota, Harris, 48, Trump 45. Pennsylvania, Insider Advantage, I don't know what that is, but it's giving Trump 1. Detroit News, Harris 47, Trump 44, Kennedy 4. Kennedy with 4, what the hell is that? On election day, I would imagine that the Kennedy vote is probably going to add in a Trump, but I could be wrong. Texas, New York Times, Siena, Trump 52, Harris 52, Harris 42, and you can go down the line to the other battleground states. Arizona, 48, 46, Trump. Georgia, 48, 46, Trump. I hope you see my point. It's so close that the margins of error are being hit. And I want to go to the map. Where's the map? Where's the map? Let's look for the presidential polling map. Because, and I've shown it before, when you're looking at it, the trend line goes with Trump being down, and then with over the context of a month, like let's say September to now, you can see him tick up and up and up and up and up to finally get to the point where he overtakes Kamala Harris. So when you hear AOC, Obama, Michelle Obama going after people who may vote third party, that's why they're so deeply paranoid. And as Axios reported, there's a sense within the Democratic Party that Kamala Harris is going to lose or that she is losing. And so they're like, we need to press and press hard on third-party voters. Now, what would be more interesting to me, as opposed to AOC being sick of being part of the resistance, would be an honest analysis of how are they losing to a man that they consider to be completely ill-prepared to take the office? How are you losing to this guy? Why on earth is a billionaire able to eat your lunch? Meaning, the Democratic Party, if you remember, was the party of unions. The unions was effectively the working man. The 1% was in opposition to the working man. They even used the term, the 1% were fighting the top 1%. We want to eat the rich. We want a fair go of things. Okay, fair enough. Fast forward to what? 16 years, 10 years later, and you have a blue-collar billionaire who is calling himself the hero of the working class, that he's going to make America great again, with the Democratic Party being considered to be elitist. How did that happen? And I'm saying, if you are AOC or if you're somebody else, the analysis is more interesting there, as opposed to going after all of these other people to try to get these people to vote for you without you understanding why they're not voting for you. To make this more clear, you get, 50% of the public, give or take, that don't vote. Why are you hounding Jill Stein when you have 48 to 50% of the public that is checked out of the political process? Wouldn't your lot in life be better? Trying to get those people, trying to convince those people that they need to get on board? And again, why they're not voting. I'm trying to press on this notion of a little bit of introspective analysis in the context of a political party, and trying to get across that going after people who don't want to vote for you, it is more productive to figure out what happened. How did you lose these people? How did these states become teeter-totter? How did you lose the House of Representatives? The House of Representatives used to be owned by the Democratic Party for like 50 years, going all the way up to 1995. Republicans had only won the House of Representatives like twice. Again, what happened? This stuff isn't magic. It's not like the public has fundamentally changed. What happened? I would argue that analysis is far more important and far more, give more bang for the buck, as opposed to basically attacking other people who decide to not vote for you. This is Obama stomping for Harris. And listen to what he says.
I do not want to do 4 more years of resistance nonsense under Donald Trump, okay? Like,
We have consistently urged the Georgian government this year to walk back its...
Do we remember what it was like?
Why is AOC running her mouth? There we are.
If you're a Christian and you care deeply about the abortion issue, I understand that, but does that mean you'll support somebody who seems to violate pretty much every precept of the Ten Commandments? If you are a service member and you're somewhat conservative and you're used to voting Republican, I can understand it, but somebody who genuinely does not believe in duty and honor and does not understand why anybody would sacrifice themselves on behalf of their country, why would you do that? If you're a Muslim American and you're upset about what's happening in the Middle East, why would you put your faith in somebody who passed a Muslim ban and repeatedly suggested that somehow you weren't part of our American community?
Obama is fundamentally, intentionally or not, missing the point. He's fundamentally missing the point. Look, it's not that Donald Trump is this trustworthy figure. I don't even believe that the Muslims or Arabs trust him per se. I don't think trust is the issue. I think what they are looking at it in a similar way that I'm looking at it. My mom, uncle, brother, cousin, friend, sister, wife, husband, husband's friend, etc., are being slaughtered. It's that. And the person who's doing the slaughtering is sitting in the White House right now is a Democrat. That Democrat that's sitting in the White House has given money, bullets, guns, weapons, missiles, ballistic missiles, intelligence, political support, diplomatic support to that government that is committing that genocide and that is openly committing that genocide. That same government, meaning this government under Joe Biden, have lied to the American public constantly about the reason, the context, and rationale for why all of this is basically taking place, and pretended as if all of this started on October 7th. It damn sure did not. It's that. It is this constant gaslighting. Oh, Hamas wouldn't accept the deal. Okay, you're lying. Oh, Hezbollah just attacked Israel for no reason. Israel was just standing there, the most moral apartheid state, the most moral open-air ghetto in the world. They weren't doing anything to anybody. And they were just attacked for no reason. Okay, this is nonsense. And those people in Michigan, many people like me, they know it's nonsense. They know you're lying. Even when they killed Sinwar. And their response was, okay, this is an opening. We've killed Sinwar. Maybe we can get a deal. Knowing full well that Netanyahu had no interest in getting a deal and that his objective was a larger Israel. Those people know that the U.S. government worked with Israel, knowing full well that it was starving Palestinians. And Blinken would get up there and lie through his teeth about it, lied to Congress, in fact. The issue is not, do they trust Donald Trump? The issue is that they are drawing a line in the sand and saying, no political party should get elected while backing, supporting a genocide. It's just that. Meaning, you can't get my vote while also backing a genocide. Our values, the values that were instilled with me in living in this particular country, said that's wrong. And because it's wrong, you shouldn't get a reward for doing so. Nor am I going to be understanding about it. You can't have it both ways. You can back a genocide, you can do that, or you can get these votes. You can't do both. This argument that Obama is making fully ignores the fact that Joe Biden is sitting in that office. And to make it even that much worse, the person who is running against Trump right now, Kamala Harris, has sat down on multiple locations in multiple interviews and said, I would not have done anything different, nor can I think of anything different that I would do. And on one situation after the next, which he was being asked this very specific question about whether you would do something different than Joe Biden on the issue of Israel and Gaza, her answer is no. Same old, status quo. You are out of your mind if you really think a party should be rewarded for backing a genocide. Full stop. This idea that, well, they're Arabs, they're Muslims, they're in another country. It shouldn't affect me. It shouldn't concern me. I got to get an abortion. I need, some kind of economic something. I get that. But that's wrong. And not just wrong. The last thing you should want is for no standards for a political party. Elections go beyond the individual race. And what I mean by that is there is a consistency that takes place over the course of time. Do you really want to eliminate the standard associated with the genocide? My answer is no. My answer is I want set in stone, set in some kind of brimming platinum that makes it clear if you support a genocide, you will lose. And the next election, when they go into it, if something similar is happening, they know completely, full well, if I am going to support this particular policy, I am going to lose. That needs to be drilled down as if it was a law of God himself. Full stop. This argument that tries to ignore that point and put it on this notion of trusting Trump. Try again. Try again. Speaking of try again, let's go to Michelle Obama, who is also stomping for Kamala Harris. Let's hear what she has to say. Let's hear her make her argument.
That there are a lot of angry, disillusioned people out there, upset with the slow pace of change. And I get it. It is reasonable to be frustrated. We all know we have a lot more work to do in this country. But to anyone out there thinking about sitting out this election or voting for Donald Trump or a third-party candidate in protest because you're fed up, let me warn you, your rage does not exist in a vacuum. If we don't get this election right, your wife, your daughter, your mother, we as women will become collateral damage to your rage. So, are you as men prepared to look into the eyes of the women and children you love and tell them that you supported this assault on our safety? And to the women listening, we have every right to demand that the men in our lives do better by us. We have to use our voices to make these choices clear to the men that we love. Our lives are worth more than their anger and disappointment. And we are more than just baby-making vessels.
I have no idea what the hell she's talking about. The very notion that somebody either voting for Trump or not voting for Kamala Harris is somehow responsible for the reproductive rights of the country itself. Look, the Democratic Party has had decades to enshrine Roe v. Wade into law as opposed to case law. Obama, when he ran, pointed out that he was going to enshrine this into law. And then when he got in office, he effectively said, this is not the top thing on my agenda to do. Look at your husband. Why are you looking at me? Look at your husband. The husband was in office. He had the opportunity. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, Obama had a supermajority for a little while, at least. It wasn't on his list of things to do. And now you're trying to make this argument that somehow all of these other people who are not voting for Kamala Harris are somehow responsible for your reproductive rights. The Democratic Party, again, needs to do a bit of soul searching to figure out why they lose. And not just why they lose, how they've gotten to this point that the working class seems to be disconnected to a party that at one point was the avatar of that same working class. Again, try again. Try again. Look, I'm going to take a quick break because I'm going to bring in Professor Morandi, and he is supposed to be in like 2 minutes. So I'm going to reset. And wait 1 second. Let me make sure there are no chats. I said I was going to read all super chats, so I want to make sure. All right, I don't see any. Okay. All right, so I'm going to take a quick break. And I'm going to bring in Professor Morandi. Hopefully, there's no issues associated with this today. Back in a moment. Better yet, what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to end this segment, and then I'm going to resume with Professor Morandi. So I'm going to say this. If you guys enjoy, give it a like, give it a share. I guess you can't give it a share, but definitely share the content. Feel free to comment. I do look at the comments. I do pay attention. Sometimes I even respond. If you really like it, consider donating, whether it's through PayPal, Super Chat, or Patreon. All of it is helpful. And as I said before, even if it's a like, it is deeply appreciated and is a great benefit to the channel in and of itself. So my objective is to grow. My objective is to make this the best damn morning show on issues of political, domestic, and international. There's a little bit of work I need to do. I need to find a better means of, I'm still running into sound issues, but it's a hell of a lot better than it was the first week. So I'm going to say like, share, subscribe, and you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you probably in the next 10 minutes. Have a good one all. Signing off.